Hello and welcome to the show. My name is John Richardson and you're listening to the Richardson Rubicon podcast, which has got a talk show which is called Riffing the Rubicon, and that's what we are on right now. So today I'm going to be talking about a wealth tax, and one of the reasons I'm going to be talking about that is because there seems to be a flurry of mention of this in the mainstream media and on social media as well. And I've got to say, I've been watching a few videos by Gary Stevenson as well, and he has really got a good campaign going about tackling wealth inequality. So full props to him for really getting me spurred on to create an episode around the similar themes. So anyway, before I do any of that, what have you guys been doing? You been busy? Been getting on with stuff? I've been getting on with stuff. We've had some lovely American guests in, and they've been from Texas, actually. And we didn't mention the T word or the M word or anything like that. We just basically kept all of that. What should I call it? We kept all of that contentious topic to one side, and I've got to be a professional anyway and greet them and give them a good time, which is what I did. But I've got a question for anyone out there, really. Is it normal for people, typically Americans I've noticed, but is it normal for you to absolutely pile up the tomato ketchup on your plate into a huge mound about the size of my Samsung phone? Is it normal? And then only to dab a few bits in and to leave it? I just don't get it. They stayed for 3 nights, so we had 3 breakfasts, and it was the same sort of pattern. It was really weird. I'm just wondering if it's a thing, because they're not the only guests that have done it. Quite a few guests have done it. So anyway, back on topic. So there is a petition on 38 Degrees. It's by a chap called Jake Atkinson on behalf of Tax Justice UK. And I have contacted Jake just to see if he would like to take part in the podcast, tell us all about his petition and stuff like that, and maybe get some other people involved by having him talk about it and things. But he declined. He's obviously a very busy chap because he couldn't spare 10 minutes for this lowly podcast. The petition, I'm going to say, has got around about 93,000 signatures. 7,000 to go to the target of 1,000, which is good. And the petition is entitled Tax the Super Rich to Stop Cuts to Public Services. And this is on the same lines as the stuff that Gary Stevenson, who is an ex-trader and is now retired, he's an inequality activist now. And some of the things I saw, I'm just going to give you a potted version, really. But in his videos, he's basically said, right, what's happened is you've got like 4 levels, right? So you've got the poor, you've got the middle class, you've got the government, which is interesting, and then you've got the absolutely super rich type of scenario. I mean, he went into a little bit more detail than that and a little bit more nuance, but that was kind of like the gist of it for what I'm about to say next. And in it, he basically says what tends to happen is the poor are actually driving the economy, right? Which is, if anyone is familiar with Labour, as it used to be, especially under Jeremy Corbyn and also when Michael Foot was around and also Tony Benn. But basically, they were all of the ilk of saying that if people have got money in their pockets, they will spend that money, and that is the engine that allows businesses to thrive, and that also creates a good tax environment at that level as well. So you got businesses making money, so they get a little bit of tax. You got everybody sort of creating the economy. There's churn going on in the economy, and you've got businesses popping up, you've got businesses closing and changing and morphing and expanding and doing all of these lovely things. So you've just got to cast your mind back to, I mean, some of you who are watching this right now are not of that age probably, but the 70s and 80s, where you'll see a lot of boomers and Gen X get all misty-eyed and say, oh, well, they were the great days. They were the fantastic days. Shops were always busy. The high streets were busy. There was always cafes and stuff like this. And that was because people had money in their pockets to spend on these things. That's what it was about. So gradually over time, tax on the, well, I'm not going to call poor, but I'm going to say working class, basically increased. So now we're actually paying quite a lot of tax in many different ways. I mean, VAT, there's the income tax. Obviously, we're paying a little bit more income tax now because the tax thresholds have not moved up in line with inflation, essentially. So, which was the part of the contract, if you like, that we all had, where it rose up with inflation. So therefore, if your wages didn't increase, you weren't going to be at risk of paying any tax. Whereas now we've got a situation where people's wages aren't increasing above the inflation rate, and their tax threshold is remaining static. So over time, they're going to pay more tax. What happens then? Well, people, tighten their belts, don't they? That's what tends to happen. And what Gary Stevenson is saying is that this belt tightening goes on and on and on and gets worse and worse over time. And because the flow of money due to various mechanisms, favors the flow of money from the poor to the super rich have got nowhere else to, or nothing else to do with this money. So what they tend to do is they either lock it up in a bank account somewhere or start buying assets. Well, the common term for assets in our language and in our world would be property. So they start buying property. And this, he explains, is why people are starting to be priced out of the housing market, because the super rich are buying all of these properties and they're basically making the price go up, which means that old meme that goes around where back in the day, you could buy your house for 3.5 times your annual salary and put down, say, a 10% deposit that you could save quite easily. Well, that's just ancient history, isn't it? House prices are so ridiculously expensive, $500,000 for a basic house in many places. You just can't really do that because no one is getting paid that amount of money to be able to purchase those properties. So his argument is that there are lots of structures in place that move money upwards towards the super rich. The super rich buy loads of assets. That depresses the housing market for the working class. And what's coming next is the middle class start to feel the squeeze as they are getting taxed more. So they're starting to tighten their belts as well. They're obviously paying more money for their properties. And all of this goes on and on and on. And then we get into the realms of where the governments are starting to run out of money because they're doing a lot of supporting. So they're basically, for example, low wages basically get supported by not job seekers allowance. What is it? It's a tax universal credit. So basically, some low-wage paying employers are getting the wages subsidized by the government. It's like socialism for businesses. And because of that spend, the governments have less money. So we've seen it over the years where it's this mechanism that Gary Stevenson talks about is quite visible, especially for someone for my age, where I've lived through the 70s as a young child. I've got to say, I'm not that old. 80s where things were in abundance, really. Yes, there was a couple of depressions and things like that, but still things were in abundance. 90s, awesome years, right? And then we've got up until 2008, and there was even more money removed from various economies. And then, of course, we had COVID, where, again, the government took this supporting role, and now we've got even less money. So the argument is currently in the media and on social media is we really need to start taxing the super rich, and that will stop the cuts to public services. I'm not sure it will stop all of the cuts to public services, but it'll stop some of them. And I just want to basically take a pause for a second and open the lines. So if you are interested in calling in, I'm just going to pop in the chat. There we go. Pop in the chat the actual URL to take part in the show. So the lines are now open. And a brief pause.
You can now call into the show. Use the link in the show chat. You'll be queued and have a private room with John and the other guests. And before you know it, you'll be live on the show. Make sure your optional camera and necessary microphone are ready. Use headphones if you have them. Be clothed. We'll see you soon. Click that link now.
So there we go. One of the texts of the petition, basically from Jake, basically says that living standards are falling, millions live in poverty, and the cost of living crisis has made affording the basics difficult. I mean, it's almost Dickensian out there. The government is looking to make cuts on various services. In fact, some governments are looking to gain more revenue from the ordinary people of the world once again. So things like the visitor levy, which I go into great detail on previous episodes, is another revenue stream basically for local government, not central government, local government, but it's to augment the funds that they're no longer getting from central government. So it does have a huge impact. Do you mind if I have some water? I'm going to have some water. But before I do anything else, and hopefully someone will call in or make a comment, and let's have a look. Is anyone there at the moment? Yes, there's a few people there. So this is the proposal, right? I'm just going to put it on screen. The proposal is a 2% annual wealth tax on assets over £10 million. That's been backed by Tax Justice UK. The plan could raise £24 billion per year, which is a huge sum. And they state that's more than the entire UK policing budget, or nearly enough to reverse recent cuts to local councils, the NHS, and education. It's a lot of money, 24 billion. But also, I think what we need to do is have a quick exercise in discussing what 20 billion looks like. So on this petition, it says the average wealth of the top 10 richest people in the UK, right? The average wealth of the top 10 richest people in the UK is 20.5 billion. That's huge. And it's up nearly 50% in 5 years. And there are many, many charts and graphs which will show you the almost exponential rise in the wealth of the rich and the steady, and with a couple of peaks and troughs, the steady wealth, if you like, of the working poor. And I'm going to put myself in that category as well. It also says it's difficult to comprehend the scale of the wealth. Now, I listen to a lot of radio shows, and someone made a comment that that the wealth is something like £10 notes on top of each other from here to the moon 2 or 3 times, which is unimaginable, really. And another way of looking at it is that 20.5 billion If you earned £3,600 every hour, £3,600 every hour, it'll take you 650 years to get to 20.5 billion. I mean, wow. That is just staggering, isn't it? 20.5 billion is a huge amount of money. It goes on to say that the UK is the sixth richest country in the world, which we know, but the amount of wealth is held by a very small proportion of the population. So the UK's 50 richest families have more wealth than the poorest 50% of the population combined, 34 million people. So you can see now how unequal the wealth distribution is in the UK. So that proposal there is the 2% annual wealth tax on assets over 10 million. Now, it's important that that is stated because it is not going to affect the majority of people. Let's put it that way. It's only going to affect the small amount of people who've got a wealth of 10 million or more. And if you've got a 2% annual wealth tax on 10 million or more, I can't work it out what it might be. I think it'd be something like £300,000 tax a year, which is kind of like nothing to them. And another thing you've got to consider as well is that the average tax on the individual person of normal, I'm just going to say normal person, right, is around about what, 25%, 30%, somewhere there. So if you've got a few on 20%, you've got a few on 40%. So somewhere in the middle, you've got around about 25, 30%. So I'm just going to be broad terms like that, yeah? But the super rich, they don't pay that amount of tax at all. Due to various mechanisms and other things, they get to pay 3 or 4% tax. So the unequal tax system is working in their favor all the time, and it's not working in your favor at all. 65% of UK millionaires who have been polled on this are in favor of a wealth tax. So, of course, are many unions. I'd be surprised if many of them weren't. Leading economists, think tanks, charities, and community groups are all in favour of the wealth tax. So this petition is an important petition. I would suggest that I will put it in the link in the show notes so you can easily take part. Unite has called for this 1% wealth tax, and The Guardian recently have run an editorial on a wealth tax as well. So the conversation is now shifting, and the reason for that is people are feeling the pinch. They can't really be taxed anymore, and something needs to change. Something needs to be done. Politically, we've got the Labour Party who are under siege, let's put it that way. People voted for change, and they expected some of the rich to perhaps get taxed. And unfortunately, what has happened is that, well, that hasn't happened. That hasn't happened. They're just talking about cuts to public services, more misery, basically. And of course, who is stepping into the gap to take advantage of this? Well, that's our Nigel Farage is stepping into the gap there. And their manifesto, I don't know if you've read it, it sounds great. I'm not sure it's been costed, but unlike Jeremy Corbyn's, which was fully costed, but basically Farage's is not really costed at all as far as I'm aware, but it does sound great. It's just what people want to hear, and that is the danger. So I think that it would be remiss of Labour not to take advantage of the current groundswell where 78% of the UK population think a wealth tax on the super rich is a good idea. Now for the challenges. A wealth tax is not a new idea at all. And in fact, in many countries, a wealth tax has failed. So I'm just going to put one interaction. I was on Blue Sky today, just pootering about as you do. And basically, I saw this post by, what's he called? Let me see if I've got his name anywhere. I've got copious notes on this, as you can probably see. He's called Mike Galsworthy, Dr. Mike Galsworthy. So basically, the chap who founded the Bylines network, if you like. So he made a post about the wealth tax today, which I also responded to. And someone was saying, well, what do we do? How do we how do we get out of this rut that we're in now? My mind was full of Gary Stevenson's videos and everything else. And I just said, well, tax the super rich until their pips squeak. And then I got an interesting set of responses once I posted across some parts of this petition. And one of them was from a chap called Sam. And Sam said that not many people have physical assets over 10 million. Most assets that's higher in shares, etc. And they would just be re-registered in an offshore company within 24 hours and then invisible to UK authorities. The tax would raise very little. Now, this is actually quite a common response to the wealth tax. The technical details of identifying, where the assets and all sorts of other stuff like that. And yeah, I get that. But also as part of the petition, and this is quite lengthy, there's a lot of academic modelling done by Dr. Aaron Advani of the University of Warwick and others. Now, he did a lot of work for the UK Wealth Tax Commission, and he's the one that is actually responsible for the figures that have been quoted on this petition. And they do say that there could be behavioural changes, i.e. not an avoidance per se, because that sounds awful, but, finagling to avoid paying the tax is what he's on about. But yeah, and he talks about emigration, this whole thing where the rich leave the country. And you saw it, I can't remember what paper it was on, but there were pictures of jets leaving the UK when the rich are fleeing, all of that sort of stuff. And I just found that incredible because the rich won't flee, and it's been proven, the rich won't flee if their families are here, they've got ties here, they've got economic ties here, the cultural bonds, societal bonds, all sorts of stuff like this that would make people really just stay. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. But Mr. Advani's team basically says it will still raise money, sufficient amounts of money to make it worthwhile. So they've done that whole kind of risk assessment and everything else on this model. I was then pointed towards posts on Blue Sky by someone called Dan Needle. I'd never heard of Dan Needle. I am not an economist. I'm not an expert. I know that much, right? But I'd never heard of this Dan Needle. But he's kind of like a tax expert, and he's like non-partisan, and he seems like quite a good egg, that sort of person, and he's really not against a wealth tax per se, but he puts a heavy dose of pragmatism over the top of it, if you like, which is good. That is a good thing to do. But I did find that in a tweet that he made, he kind of like concentrated on where it didn't work, in certain countries where it didn't work, rather than on countries where it did. And I'm going to go into both. So this is what Dan Needle says. He says, wealth tax advocates talk about everything except actual historic wealth taxes. They raised a pittance, hit the middle class more than the wealthy, and were abolished. Right? And someone straight after that said, yes, that's true. So Neil said, what is it about British exceptionalism that thinks we can succeed where others failed? And Judith said, taxing wealth is complicated. These concrete measures targeting wealthy people work better. Taxing private schools, blocking water company bonuses, removing non-dom status, raising capital gains tax, and council tax on second homes. And I get what Judith and others are saying. I do get that. But I do think that Judith in particular is not really looking at the super rich there. She's kind of like looking at the middle class there, I think, where the people do sometimes have second homes. There was at one stage where I had a second home, since sold, of course, but I did. And also, I would never be able to afford to send my children to private schools, for example. It's just beyond my reach. So, yeah, I think she's got a mixture of ranges in there, but she's not hitting high enough at the super rich level. The super rich level, all of that doesn't matter to them, right? All of that doesn't matter to them. So the super rich have got more money than they know what to do with, and it's kind of like just sitting there. That's what it is. So I did promise I was going to go into where it failed. Hopefully you can hear me now. So, where it failed and why. It failed in France. And the reason it failed in France was it was too complicated. There was too many exemptions, outdated property valuations led to low revenue, and what they call capital flight, where people just leave. So that wealth tax was repealed in 2018. So that was quite recent, actually. That was quite recent. Germany suspended its wealth tax in 1997 after a constitutional court found inconsistencies in property valuation. So we're getting into the technicalities here. And when you're looking at assets, obviously, you've got to count property as part of the assets. And if you can't get that right, then you're going to have some major problems, aren't you? And that's what Germany faced. So there we go. Sweden repealed its tax in 2007. It only raised about 0.16% of GDP and excluded most of the actual wealthy people. So a wealth tax on everybody except the wealthy. There we go. Made sense, didn't it? Finland and Austria, they dropped their wealth taxes, citing high admin costs and limited returns. So the pattern there, I know it's written on the screen, but basically for those who are listening to the podcast, the pattern is poor design, exemptions, as in either too many or not thoroughly thought through, or maybe not enough exemptions. It all depends. But you've got to get the exemptions right, and they've got to be fair. They've got to be seen to be fair as well. That's the main point, because all of this boils down to goodwill. There was weak enforcement, lack of accurate valuation systems, and they were common across all of the failed models. And whilst I've got this on screen as well, the other thing is I want to go back to kind of like a social contract thing. So Phil White, who is a member of Patriotic Millionaires UK, says, the British people have always been proud of the shared public services we've created and are frustrated to see how they've been run into the ground. The NHS, education, the water system, don't get me started on the water system, public transport, and others desperately need funding, but British people are constantly being squeezed. They're working hard week on week against rising costs, and this is true. This makes the need for taxing the very richest even more important. There's plenty of money in the UK, but it gets stuck in the hands of the wealthiest, and while they get richer, everybody else gets poorer. We would be proud to pay more because that's what being patriotic is. Investing in a stronger, fairer Britain where our services, businesses, and communities thrive and everybody can succeed. And that is Phil White, a member of Patriotic Millionaires UK. Millionaires calling for a wealth tax. Interesting, isn't it? So there's a momentum in the media. There's the crying out for it from groups like Patriotic Millionaires, and there's a need for it. But what we really need to concentrate on as well is a political, social contract with the people, I think. I think Labour have got an opportunity here to not just design a tax for the super rich and call it a wealth tax, but Labour really need to make a contract, a social contract with the people, and put a line in the sand and say, we are going to support all public services. We are going to nationalise the railways, which is what they're already doing. We are going to improve the lot of the British people. And we are going to make Britain, make Britain great again. Oh my God, I nearly said it. I nearly went MAGA. But that is exactly what needs to happen. Once you've got that political side going on, you're then on a par with the likes of Norway. And Norway has got a really strong social contract with its people. Very strong. So that was why they failed, right? I'll go into Norway now, seeing as I've mentioned it. So Norway's wealth tax model is great. It is something that Britain can learn from. So it's got a functioning wealth tax, unlike France or Sweden or many of the others. They've got a high standard of living. I mean, there's a reason for that, and that's nominally down to their oil wealth and their fund that they created, right? But also, going back to this wealth tax, sorry, do beg your pardon, pausing a second. Oh dear, I've got to take a quick drink. That's better. Thank you. So, unlike France or Sweden, Norway's still got a functioning wealth tax. It was introduced in 1892 and still in force. Now, 1892 is about 140 years ago. So imagine that. It applies to net wealth over, and this is Norwegian kroner, 1.7 million, which is around about £125,000. So that's quite low, actually. That's quite low. The wealth tax that's been proposed by many here, who's been proposed by Tax Justice UK, right, is, over 10 million or more. So 125,000 or more in Norway is comparatively low. It combines national and municipal levies. So it raises around and regularly raises around 0.4% of GDP, which is not insignificant. It helps fund the high quality public services across Norway, and it relies on transparent valuations, social trust, and compliance. It does have drawbacks. There has been some recent emigration of ultra-wealthy individuals. There are liquidity concerns for asset-rich, cash-poor households, and there's ongoing debates about investment disincentives. But it is popular, it's broad-based, it's clear, and it's politically integrated. So it is something that actually works. But I guess with all of these wealth taxes, there needs to be some fine tuning involved and very carefully thought out fine tuning so that there are no major issues. It doesn't sort of become it doesn't destroy itself by being adjusted incorrectly, for example. So, like many of the others. And I did get asked, wasn't it Neil who basically said, what is it about British exceptionalism? And, why do we think we could do it better or make it succeed? And I think really this has been answered here. So I've got another little slide. So there we go. Why it could work better in the UK. The UK may be uniquely placed to succeed where others failed. Strong data infrastructure. So HMRC already tracks high net worth individuals, and digital property and financial records are improving valuation capacity. So the information is there in terms of data and knowledge. But do we have the wisdom? That's the question. Concentrated wealth. The top 1% holds a larger share of wealth in the UK than in many European countries, meaning a well-designed tax could be targeted and yield more. There we go. Political visibility. Wealth inequality is a mainstream political issue, and public pressure has led to reforms in non-dom status, widely publicised that is, and capital gains tax, and stamp duty, and of course we had the whole thing about the private planes as well. So politically, it kind of makes sense to do. And I did mention earlier that there's a crest of the wave scenario here that Labour really could boost their flagging popularity on and do a lot of good for the country. International transparency. So as the UK is a global financial hub, the UK has got access to more cross-border data sharing via the OECD's Common Reporting Standard, helping identify offshore wealth. So I'm sure there'll be some finagling going on and stuff like this, but the mechanisms are in place to actually identify where all of that money dissipates to. I'm not saying anything. There are also existing enforcement mechanisms. So the infrastructure used for inheritance tax, capital gains, and anti-money laundering can be adapted to wealth tax enforcement. I mean, so far I've not read anything bad. This is all good. This is all like little checklists. All systems go. And public support, and it's what I said earlier. And of course I said it earlier because I wrote this. But public support, 78% of the UK public and 65% of millionaires support wealth taxation. That's a higher approval than existed in many of the countries where it failed. So, with the right exemptions, the right valuation rules, and the right coordination, the UK could design a tax that avoids the pitfalls that were seen in countries like France or Sweden. Now then, we could do it. Will we do it? And also, will we do it right? Those are the two questions. So I'm going to round up and basically say that Rachel Reeves, Keir Starmer, they need to get their heads together and actually give this a good looking at. A good looking at, right? Because politically, if they catch the crest of the wave now and make that social contract with the people of Britain once again and talk about how public services, which are the domain of Labour, at least they used to be, the domain of Labour, and make that contract and say that all these services are going to be preserved and improved. And this is how we're going to do it. We're going to have a wealth tax. It's not going to drive the ultra wealthy away, right? We're going to make it fair. We're going to make it equitable, and we're going to make it sensible, and all those good words, right? And essentially, we're going to be able to police it, and we've got the knowledge on how we're able to do this. If they do that, then they will see themselves rise in the polls. They will see themselves probably go to a second term, and they will basically be the ruination of Reform UK. Because the people who are looking at Reform UK now are looking for what Labour should be doing. They're looking at things like, well, they're going to start public spending. They're going to benefit the schools. They're going to do this. They're going to do that. And remember, that's not costed. That manifesto for reform is not costed, at least not as far as I'm aware. Correct me if I'm wrong. But people just want to hear the good news. Yeah? And Labour have just been full of nothing but bad news. More tax, more austerity, cuts to public services. They really need to get on the crest of the wave here and do a wealth tax. I urge you to help in that regard as well, and that is to take part in the petition, which I'll link to. And by all means, contact Jake Atkinson and tell him that there's a great podcast episode done by John Richardson, and he should have taken part to state his case. He should have taken part to state his case. And I think it's a damn shame that I didn't, but who can blame him? I'm just a little guy out of nowhere. What can I say? Anyway, that is it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope that you're having a great day. I will convert this into a podcast, and it'll be squirted in your direction through your podcatcher of choice, and I'll do that over the next couple of days. If you've got any questions, queries, comments, or anything like that, or suggestions, then you can contact me via email, and that's at john@richardsonsrubicon.com. So that's john@richardsonsrubicon.com, and you can contact me on Blue Sky, preferably, really. So if you go on Blue Sky and look up richardsonsrubicon.com, you'll find me there. Please follow me, say hi, and I'll say hi back, and then we can ignore each other for a little bit, look a little bit awkward. And there we go. So yeah, but do get in touch. You can join the forum as well. And of course, subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. So just richardsonsrubicon.com, and the podcast name is Richardson's Rubicon. And you can also get Alexa, to play it by saying, "Oi, play Richardson's Rubicon podcast," and they will do that. That's Siri as well, does it as well. So anyway, right. Well, that's it for today's show. And I'm trying desperately to coolly link to something, and I hit the wrong button, so that didn't work. See you next time. It's every Thursday, 9 p.m. for the live show, and a couple of days after that for the podcast release. Feel free to contact me at any time. I'm really happy to hear from you, and get in touch. Bye. Oh, and be a guest on the show. Just come on. It's a call-in show. Call in. The link is always in the live chat. And also what I do is I provide a link on the website, a guest link, on the day of the broadcast. So richardsonsrubicon.com/be on the show with hyphens, or you can use rubypod.live/.link rubypod.link/live takes you to the live page to watch, right? And it's all linked on the website anyway. But basically, there's an invite there, and I've even done a funky QR code, and there's all sorts of ways to get in touch anyway. Enough of that. Right, bye.
Riffing the Rubicon. the talk show at the end of its tether. This podcast was brought to you by a simple man. The website is at richardsonsrubicon.com, where you will find all social links apart from X. You'll also find the details of the next live show, which is usually on a Thursday at 9 p.m. UK time. There are many ways to take part on the show, from simply listening or watching, reading the show notes, leaving a voice note, emailing the show at john@richardsonsrubicon.com, arranging a fireside chat at a time of your choosing, becoming a guest, or calling in to the talk show during recording. You have no excuses, and we have absolutely no plan. Join in now. richardsonsrubicon.com